my head, but just in the last week, there was a huge hack in the cloud. Big companies have been just, everything taken over. I don't know. Clouds are huge, people keep going there, and I wonder someday, I'm gonna be extreme here, we're gonna go back to everybody having servers and not having their stuff up there because it's just not as safe as it looks, But I wanna quickly say to the audience, and you're such a lovely audience. When I walked in, I felt like I was going to a football game or something. It's so exciting, so buzzy. You're sending out questions. I'm writing them down because I wanna get through a few things. As the moderator, I can selfishly make sure I get to ask questions I want to hear answered, but we're gonna start bringing in your questions and plenty of time to run through a lot of them. And another thing I wanna ask you guys about, in the academic world, I love things like this where you have someone like Mark Carney. He's suave, he's smart, he's been the head of the Bank of England, he's leaving, giving this kind of surprising speech about, was it 3 months ago? Where he talked about digital currencies, how they need to be developed, forget the dollar, this is going to be, more secure, more something. And then I love it, just a few days ago, Geeta Gopinath, she's now working for Christine Lagarde, right? Very, very prominently.
She's a former Booth faculty
member. Started her career at Booth.
That's right. Yes. In an op-ed in the Financial Times, oh, come on, central banks develop digital currencies. Are you kidding? Dollars, all kinds of reasons why it's the world's reserve currency. So I want you to start on this, Raghu. Where do you stand on this question?
So I think she was reacting to the notion that somehow others will develop a digital currency which will take over the role of the dollar. And I think that may have been the thrust of Mark's speech, though I've only read reports of it. And I think she was coming at it from the perspective of her research, which is the dollar is really dominant. There's a lot of pricing of exports in the dollar. One of the reasons people trust the dollar, and 60% of pretty much every transaction in finance is in dollars, is because it is a deep open market, and the US historically, till very recently, didn't try to use finance as a means of pressurizing countries. One of the concerns is that this politicization of the dollar now may in fact cause people to turn away. One example is Russia, which has moved away from holding its reserves in dollars, at least to the extent that it did, and you can imagine that could expand if the dollar is used as a weapon. But her broader point was more about the view that the dollar would be replaced, and I don't think we need to go there to argue that digital currencies could have a strong future. The question is, will it be central banks that will issue them, or will it be a Libra or something like that? Again, it's the power of networks, it's the power of information. One of the big concerns that central banks have about Libra is, first, this is not a company that is well known for protecting your information. It's also a huge monopoly in its own right. So add to it a payments monopoly, and what else can that lead to? That's certainly a concern across the world. And certainly from the perspective of small countries, a very big fear is Libra will displace their own currencies. Because it's so much easier to use, and if you can get in and out easily, why would you hold a depreciating currency in a small developing country rather than move into the Libra? So these are concerns that need to be addressed. I think one of the big concerns Libra has always had is they have to persuade the regulators, and I have to say right now the regulators have not yet been persuaded.
And look, just think about every country of the world. I kind of don't understand what the circumstance Facebook would want to get into this, in that any illegal activity, if you go look at Bitcoin, a vast chunk of the transactions are obviously, they're not good. We had a woman came and gave a paper that analyzed the whole blockchain as of, I think her data went up to 2017 or something. And she said, well, 25% of these transactions are money laundering. And in the audience, we were like, well, how do you know that? And she said, well, There are people coming from the sites moneylaundering.com, launderyourbitcoin.com. I was like, what? So imagine now Libra becomes the big currency, and somebody makes a payment. Somebody buys whatever. I send you a payment for a terrorist action, or I buy drugs, or whatever. Every country of the world is going to view that as a massive threat to their sovereignty, and they're not wrong, and they're going to try to hold Facebook accountable in their country for facilitating criminal transactions. And they're not wrong to do that. You know, they're going to say Facebook should go put some regulator and govern what's happening in the transactions the way banks do, and then once that happens, they're in the regulated world.
Austin, just on that point, I mean, it is true that Bitcoin would be used largely for laundering. Otherwise, the transaction costs are not worth it, right? If you want to make a payment to your for your coffee, you're not going to use Bitcoin precisely because of the cost that you pointed out. But it is possible that something like Libra could be so easy to use that the vast majority of the transactions are legal and some small minority are illegal, as true of money also. True. But you're absolutely right that they have a huge amount of reputational risk, and they will have to convince central bankers, one, that they will be able to control the know your customer problem,
right?
But also, I guess, that they will not misuse the information and the networks that they obtain as a result.
but you know they will misuse it. I mean, that is
but this is the interesting thing. They really know their customer. Unlike others. There's nobody else who knows their customer like some of these big tech firms. No, it's very interesting to see this sort of back and forth about whether central banks should be issuing a currency or not digitally. And there's been a lot of discussion about whether China is going to do that, because the Chinese central bank, and so the Chinese system, works rather centrally. And so if they want to eliminate currency, and if people object, the objectors are not going to get very far. They will be able to execute on that. And it's going to be very interesting to see if they do something like this, because that, again, could be a very interesting test case for how things would operate. Because obviously it would be all centrally controlled. Mm-hmm. Every single transaction would be monitored. Many of the transactions are already monitored through the large fintech firms, but this would make it complete. And in some sense, it's very interesting to see the different models around the world. So you have GDPR in Europe, which is a lot of data protection, privacy issues. So a lot of fragmentation of data. China's the opposite, where everything kind of goes into the central government's computer, and they can monitor everything. And we're sort of somewhere in between. And it's going to be very interesting to see how that develops. Is that something that's going to be a strength for China, that's going to be difficult for the West to compete with? Or is it something that is going to lead to more problems because people become outraged in China of the extent of this monitoring and sort of rise up against it? I think that's one of the big political economy questions that come out of these big tech issues.
Okay, I want to just put a very broad question on the table in terms of technology, innovations, and for each one of you, like, what's sort of the biggest plus and the minus? Because it's great to see many things disrupted. They do get more efficient, new things happen. And at the same time, some people worried about some concentration developing in the economy. Competition, innovation, equality. What's for each one of you, like, what's the big question right now?
For me, it's what do we do about the jobs that are lost due to automation? That's going to continue. That's possibly going to increase. How do we find ways in which people can rediscover good work? And I think the first thing is, obviously, as people lose jobs and wages sort of fall, the market will react to some extent. But the question is, can we prepare them better for the kinds of jobs that are emerging, so that some combination of tech and human will emerge again to do a better job than tech alone or human alone. And I don't think we're thinking very hard about it. We sort of throw out education as something that's necessary, but what kind of education? And how do you get education to the places that are being left behind? What do we do in those places? What should those places do, and how do we facilitate their doing it? We haven't had that conversation, and I think this is the central conversation that we should be having, because this is the source of political fracture in a number of industrial countries. And if the reaction to that political fracture is to actually put enormous constraints on markets, on corporations, etc., we will eliminate our ability to actually react to the problem.
What's interesting is that I think it's more the fear of that than the actuality of that. Because if you look over we just got the jobs report this morning, and it's astonishing that we've had basically more than 20 million jobs created over the last decade, the unemployment rate at 3.5%. And what's interesting is that there's been more job growth at the low-skilled sector. The reduction in unemployment rate has been greater there, the growth of jobs has been greater there. So we actually haven't seen this yet, but I think it's an issue because people fear that. But but it actually hasn't happened yet.
Well, what has happened is the jobs that paid at the middle level have disappeared, and you're getting many more jobs at the lower level and some jobs at the upper level. But there's a gap in between. Now, whether those were protected by strong unions and there were rents there, or they were truly sort of well-paid jobs, the reality is the middle is much thinner than it used to be, and this is across industrial countries. So today, to get one of those really good jobs, the leap you have to make in terms of your skilling, your education, is much higher than it used to be in the past, where with a high school job, you get a good job at GM, and you're made for life. So I think you're absolutely right. We're talking about jobs in a period where unemployment is really, really low. And so we need to ask, what jobs are we talking about? Well, not the kinds of jobs which put a earpiece in your ear and tell you which bin to go to next to pick up the stuff that you put together in a package and send for Amazon.
And not to add a potentially depressing component to that, if the economy's doing well and the unemployment rate is this low, and people are already so angry about wages and immigration and blah, 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 imagine what happens during the next recession. I mean, it seems like this could be a dark path, in a way that.
No, and I see this in the UK.